Hello, a very good morning to you all on this glorious May morning. I am Peter Stevens, the President of the TMA UK chapter, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce this first of a series of webinars hosted and arranged by one of TMA's long-standing supporters, Colliers International. TMA is a global organisation and is the most professionally diverse organisation in the corporate restructuring, renewal and turnaround space. With nearly 10,000 members in 53 chapters worldwide, belonging to the TMA allows members to gain the knowledge and expertise they need to succeed in these incredibly challenging times. Whilst we're obviously not able to network in person at this time, we hope these events enable you to stay connected to the wider turnaround community. If you're not already a member, please do go to our website where there are details of how to join and also future events. I'm delighted to extend a very warm welcome to 6 new members. You can see them on the screen now who've joined up in the last month. And I hope that they, along with more than 600 people who've registered for today's event, find this a valuable and useful update on what is going on in this critical industry as part of the wider phase we are suffering at the moment. I'll now pass over to Nick Hammond of Colliers International, who's put all this together, and he will introduce the panel and take us through the running order. Thank you for joining us today, and Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us in this first in this series of webinars, Real Estate Restructuring Strategies Beyond COVID-19. As Peter says, my name is Nick Hammond and I head the advisory and restructuring team at Colliers. We provide real estate restructuring, turnaround and insolvency advice to lenders, investors, business management teams and practitioners across all UK property sectors. That means that we get to experience a wide range of projects spanning a variety of sectors and locations involving businesses of various shapes and sizes. So this webinar series will examine a cross-section of those market sectors to discuss how businesses and their stakeholders can respond to and manage the challenges and opportunities ahead. Today, we'll be focusing on the hospitality sector and asking how hotel and leisure businesses can navigate their exit from lockdown amid social distancing, and crucially, what their post-crisis business models might look like. To do so, I'm joined by a panel of experts, including Julian Troop, head of our hotel agency team in the UK, Ben Godin, who heads the Hospitality Asset Management Division, Ross Curtin, who heads our UK Leisure team, and I'm also delighted that we're welcoming Tim Rumney, Chairman of Best Western GB. I'm sure many of you will have seen Tim last night on the Channel 4 programme, A Very British Hotel Chain. Tim, if I may say so, it looks like you have some great hotels and some great people in your business, and your team development days certainly look like a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So to get things underway, I'd first like to introduce Julian Troop. Julian heads our hotel agency team in the UK, and he has over 30 years of experience in the sale of corporate and large privately owned hotels throughout the UK regions. He's personally handled the sale or acquisition of over 200 provincial hotels, and he's going to give us his views on the UK transactional market. Julian, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Morning, everybody. I thought it'd be worthwhile just giving what is classed as a hotel agent's perspective. Just to kind of set the scene, it's worthwhile knowing that the hotel and hospitality industry in the UK is the 4th biggest employer. It employs 3.2 million jobs in the industry, with a further 2.8 million indirectly linked to that. £73 billion of gross added value to the UK economy each year, and the hospitality ranks as a top 6 employer in every UK region. Just in terms of the size of the industry, in England and Wales, there are about 10,000 hotels and about 11,000 guest houses. In Scotland, about 4,500 hotels and about 1,500 guest houses. So I think the above illustrates the sheer size and importance of the industry. Ownership operation is a mixture of sophisticated and unsophisticated, insofar as sophisticated, driven to expand, created methods to actually expand, and buyers have been attracted to that due mainly to the levels of return of investment compared to other sectors. On an unsophisticated basis, demand generally driven by the likes of status symbol, lifestyle and perceived ease of operation. The hotel market very closely aligns to general economy, and it goes without saying that 2020 is going to be a very, very tough year. But STR feel that Q4 2021 and Q1 2022, things are going to get back close to where things were pre-COVID. So what happened? 24th of March, COVID-19, the government advised for accommodation providers. Great majority of the hotels closed, and there are around about 2.5 million staff that have been furloughed in the industry. Around 20% of the hotels have remained open for either key workers linked with the NHS, or there are also some hotels housing the homeless. So, you know, there are various initiatives that have taken place to keep the hotels open. Immediate action taken by hoteliers, unsurprisingly, were cost-cutting measures, rates holidays, bank loan moratorium, government grants. The bounce back loan that was recently introduced replaced the first offering, mainly because it was stated that 57% of those hoteliers that applied for the grant first off were not considered as being a viable business, and they didn't qualify. Hoteliers have been attending to compliance, CapEx, HR and health and safety matters. And other things include disruption insurance, which everyone is trying to claim, but it's going to be a battle for them. It's been in the press, and unfortunately, a lot of the policies probably aren't going to cover that. So, UK hotel outlook, there are going to be some more challenging situations dependent on the type of hotel that's out there. Air travel associated hotels unlikely to return to normality until a vaccine is found. Conference, banqueting and events will see prolonged pain. City centre will be challenging for corporate trade coming through, and luxury and major capitals may have slower recovery, mainly due to the heavy reliance on international demand. But certainly on a more positive note, we're certainly of the belief that staycation will come back, so coast and country hotels will have a spike, perhaps not replacing 2 weeks in Mallorca, but 3 and 4 day breaks is certainly something that we think will be prevalent. Serviced apartments and self-catering, so extended stay business, apart hotels, budget hotels with less reliance on full service. Really, those businesses that have extra space will equal extra comfort. Hotel transactional activity. Colliers have over 200 hotels and guest houses available at any one time. In normal circumstances, we sell around about 80 to 100 hotels every year. Q1 was a strong start, and then things changed when the lights went out on around the 24th of March. Pipelines, some of the deals fell away, some exchanged with deferred completions to fit in with the timing of the reopening of the sector, but the majority of buyers have sat on their hands and are looking to see what things are going to look like in terms of the light at the end of the tunnel. We have had active sales. There have been things actually happening. Something in Cornwall we sold a few weeks ago. Something in Wales we sold last week. There's something in Scotland which is waiting to exchange at the moment. So things are happening, but certainly at a far lower rate. And there have been some examples of things that have exchanged that have failed to complete. So the market was heating up anyway pre-COVID. The UK's weak currency was something that was driving foreign investment. So there were quite a lot of relatively inexperienced hotel investors coming into the market that were given comfort by UK management companies. Current values and pricing, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later, difficult to be precise on that really until we can actually see what's happening in the marketplace and we've got comparable evidence. So at the moment, I think values have been put on the back burner. It's more about preserving cash reserves to be able to get through these troubled times. And then, like any other correction, it'll become a survival of the fittest. We are seeing buyers. A lot of these are opportunistic at the moment. There's still numerous well-heeled cash buyers, and there are still overseas buyers out there that are contacting us. There's also been an uplift in the number of inquiries for alternative use, which doesn't surprise us. So where are hoteliers at the moment? Preparing to reopen. At the moment, it's to me a race between the tangible signs of distress versus signs of operational normality coming back. So hoteliers are planning to reopen in a phased manner. They're looking at marketing, staffing, stocking, and how to comply with physical distancing. But consideration on timing is absolutely key. Although some can open and will open, hopefully during July, some may well just sit and see what's happening to the market before they can consider where break-even point will come through. Landlords have started to clash with tenants already, and that's been well publicised. And furlough, now running to the end of October, is something that we'll see everyone frantically try and get back to opening their hotels as soon as possible. And the feeling is that hopefully it's going to be at some stage during July. Will handling distress be any different to previous times? Sadly, I'm old enough to remember back in 1991, the majority of UK hotels were owned by companies like Ernst & Young, owned and operated by them. In 2008, it was more of a consensual route where the market came forward. Then there was packaged debt to the likes of Cerberus and Lone Star, and there were very high proportions of debt at that time. So where are we now? I do think that owners, funds, lenders were sort of not surprised that there was going to be a correction in the marketplace. It's just the sheer shock of there being a closed for business scenario that we're looking at. Gearing is very different. In 2008, I think that lending was around about 75 to 80%, because since 2008, we've seen borrowing based on multiples of EBITDA. The borrowing levels are lower, more like 50 to 60%. So there is more equity. But clearly, even if there is more equity, it's about cash flow, being able to service debt moving forward. So in terms of loan to values, as I say, I think that they are not as high as they were in 2008. And I think that's quite an important consideration. Speaking generally, hotels is a robust and resilient business. It's not a case of if, it's more a case of when. And the level of need to sell, in my view, will shape the market moving forward. There will always be a flow of people selling hotels, irrespective of what's happening in the economy due to retirement, illness, and something that we call director fatigue, which means that they've just got fed up with doing it. But there's always been bumps in the road. Hotels have always been able to get through them. In 2001, foot and mouth came along and it decimated trade in the likes of the Lake District. In February, there was no one there at all. And by September, October, trade was back to normal. I'm not saying that's the case now, but people do have short memories. Also 9/11, no one thought that anyone wanted to stay in a hotel over 3 stories high, and we could see what developed thereafter. In terms of a new norm, I think well-being for customers and staff is now the primary consideration. Hotel cleanliness plans at the top of the customer experience table. Scrambling to try and get that sorted out. If you look at Hilton, they've teamed up with Dettol. Accor have teamed up with AXA, and I read yesterday that IHG have got a clean promise policy in place relating to cleaning protocols. I think there could well be kite marks that hoteliers get that will give the comfort to the customer before they actually book to stay at the hotel. Social ramifications, social distancing ramifications, clearly, absolutely at the top of the list. So just as a conclusion, we are in a period of material uncertainty. The sooner activity picks up, it will be then easier to see where we think things are going. But you know, people have got used to doing these kind of things, working at home. But I get the impression a lot of people are very keen to get back into the office, and I think the same will happen in hotels as well. That people will want to get back into hotels. We're social animals, and people want experiences, not things. And because of that, I'm quite convinced they will start to get back into hotels. Global economist Roger Bootle of Capital Economics says that the medium-term prospects for the hospitality industry are good. When travel restrictions are lifted, he expects to see a great surge of demand for hospitality offerings in the short term. It won't be sustained. There will be a disappointing phase to follow. Memories of this will fade, and the medium-term prospects for hospitality are good. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of a snapshot from an agent's perspective, and I will pass you back over to Nick.
Thanks, Julian. Some interesting stuff there, and we have some questions coming in actually about debt, you mentioned, so perhaps we can come on to that later on. And before we hand over to Ben, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask this morning for a little bit of audience participation, please. We're going to put to you this morning a series of polling questions, just really to test the mood. We'll begin with the question that should hopefully now be on your screen. We'd just like you to submit your response. How long do you expect it will take for the hotel and hospitality industry to reach full capacity again? Will it be within 6 months, within 12, within 18, or do you think it will take longer? I'll just give you a few questions to submit your responses. We will come back to the responses to this later on in the Q&A. And while you're doing that, I'll also just take this opportunity to point out and remind you that for the purposes of the Q&A, whilst we've already had several questions as part of the registration information, there is a Q&A function within the Zoom platform. So if you just hover over, I think it should be along the bottom of your screen, you can submit your questions to the panel and we'll come on to those later on. Okay, so next I'm going to hand you over to Ben Godin. Ben, as I said at the start of this, heads our hospitality asset management team. He has over 30 years of experience within the sector. He's held a variety of management roles in that time in a diverse range of hotels, both within the UK and overseas. So I'm sure he's got some interesting thoughts for us now from an asset management perspective. Ben, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you today. I'm going to take a few moments of your time this morning to talk about who we are, what we do, more importantly, what we've seen over the last few weeks, how the current crisis is affecting really hotel profit and loss accounts, and then some views on perhaps how we see life in the future. So I head up a team of hotel advisory specialists based out of London. We were one of the first European hotel asset management functions to get underway. And we look after today around 30 odd hotels around the UK and overseas for all of our clients, who all have one thing in common, that they are hotel owners. We look after hotels in the luxury segment, all the way through to MAR and PAR, privately owned and privately managed type of operations. Branded hotels to standalone hotels, smallest hotel 21 bedrooms, largest hotel 500 bedrooms. We've spent the last 20 years optimizing hotel performance for these investors, for these owners, in a broad range of functions that we deploy through myself and my team, all the way from pre-acquisition, choosing an operator, deploying CapEx, use of space, and then driving cash flow from the operations. So macro and micro advice, and typically our clients have been with us for many, many years. So we have followed these businesses through the cycles, although we all also undertake ad hoc assignments such as independent business reviews. Okay, so what have we seen in the last few weeks? No surprise, all of our hotels are closed or hibernated, whichever way you want to look at it. And that's been the case not just here in the UK, but across Europe. Pretty much every European country has had to close their hotels. Good news is some of them are beginning to reopen, and I'll come back to that in a few moments. The hoteliers who we work with are generally pretty resourceful bunch, and closing hotels is pretty straightforward, although rather unpleasant. And although these hotels are hibernated, often enough there's a core team of people left on site to make sure that these hotels are safe, secure, amongst other things. So we've been making decisions and supporting the owners in making these decisions, what to do, when to do it, and how to do it quickly and effectively. One of the main things we've had to do is establish what is the absolute minimum cost that it would take to keep this hotel open. That translates to still negative NOIs or negative EBITDAs. I'll come back to that in a few moments. And clearly trying to manage this cash burn alongside the forecasting, understanding how long we're going to be in this for and how much cash the owner needs to have available to remain solvent and fluid. On the back of all of that, we've deployed across our hotels and to the owners various workshops, including what sort of commercial activity to undertake whilst the hotel is closed or hibernating. We've deployed break-even models to NOI and EBITDA, and clearly now our thoughts are turning to how do we reopen in the not too distant future, hopefully. Okay, so the effect of all of that on hotel P&Ls, very, very straightforward. Clearly zero occupancy and zero revenue, unprecedented. And as many of you know, unfortunately, within our industry, we have pretty high fixed costs and certainly a high operating cost base. So payroll typically is a very high element of hotel hospitality. And that aside, within the overheads, much of what we have there sitting in the cost base is also fixed. So we've been looking at how to reduce, how to flex, how to change all of that for now, but also for the future. The cost base based upon a different type of hotel will change, based upon its location, based upon its positioning in the market. And overall reductions that we've seen range from, say, between 35% to 65%. Just to give you a few ideas in terms of the overheads and what we've seen in terms of overall reductions, in terms of the sales and marketing disciplines, we've seen across our range of hotels drops in expenditure from 30% all the way up to 80%, 80. In administration and general costs, we've seen reductions from 35% all the way up to 65%. In repairs and maintenance, from 50% up to 75%. And then finally in utilities, from 25% all the way up to 70%. And clearly what that illustrates is, even with a closed hotel, even with contract renegotiations, support from our suppliers, there is still quite a heavy cost base that remains in the business that needs to be taken care of. All the hoteliers, all the brands have making good use of the governmental support mechanisms. Julian touched upon some of those, they're well known to us all. And really beyond sort of the operating losses, it's then been a question of talking with the ownerships about how they can minimize the onward cost of this hotel closure in terms of their relationship with the lenders, the longer term implications of drops in values, what to do with CapEx plans, etc. So let's turn a little bit more specifically to life in the future. So we are preparing for a phased reopening. We don't have any dates from the government as to when we may be allowed to reopen hotels. As you know, hospitality may be able to reopen in part in July. My take is that hotels will be towards the end of July and possibly into August. But of course, the trick will be to only reopen your hotel, ensuring you lose no more money than you were when you were closed. So the continuation of the furlough scheme and the flexibility within the furlough scheme, amongst other measures, are going to be extremely important to be continued through the balance of the year for these owners of hotels. We're then going to have to contemplate reduced capacities. How will hotels with spa, with leisure clubs, with golf clubs, with big meeting and event facilities be able to operate on very reduced income streams from those areas? Staffing areas and staffing levels are going to be relooked at very, very carefully. We know we're going to have to spend more time cleaning bedrooms, but how do we cope with much reduced occupancy? So the hoteliers and we alongside them are busy analysing and preparing scenarios for all of those different matters that are top of our list at the moment. The likely pressure points goes without saying. Operating margins will be reduced. They'll be cut quite substantially. And ultimately, the returns on this type of industry for the foreseeable future will become much thinner, much lower. Julian touched upon the values. That's going to have a more medium-term impact as well. In terms of timings, the long haul back, how do I see it? Frankly, one of the key KPIs that we use within the industry to measure performance is RevPAR, revenue per available minute, revenue per available room, I'm sorry. And I don't see RevPAR levels returning to 2019 levels until 2022. So we've definitely got a minimum of a 2-year period to regain revenue levels. But actually in terms of profitability, and we measure that within our industry on a GOP, gross operating profit per available room basis, I think that's going to lag that 22 date by another 18 months or 2 years. So it could be up to 4 years, subject to the type of hotel that we're discussing, subject to its location, subject to its different revenue streams, its locations, etc., before we see perhaps profit levels returning to normal. There's going to be a lot of pressure on a broader basis across Europe. We know air travel is going to be very restricted. On the slight upside, we can see the leisure destinations, as Julian has alluded to, pick up more quickly, certainly in the UK, than the more transient and commercial-based locations. Hoteliers are resilient, hoteliers are resourceful. We expect them to do their best. Hopefully most of these businesses will survive. There will be casualties, but the industry is going to be different for the next 4 years than we've certainly seen in the last few years. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Ben. Again, some interesting thoughts there. And before I hand you all over to our guest speaker for the day, another quick polling question for you, please. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to these, but we're just fascinated to see the view. In order of recovery, which sectors, market segments do you feel will recover the quickest? Would it be hotels, restaurants, bars and pubs, nightclubs, or holiday parks? Get your responses into that. And while you do so, again, I just remind you, we've already got plenty of questions coming in. So we'll try and make as much time as possible for the Q&A later on. And that functionality is within the Zoom platform if you want to submit any questions. So I'm going to hand you over now to our guest speaker for the day, Tim Rumney. As I said at the top of this, many of you may have seen Tim on the box last night. He's chairman of Best Western Great Britain at the moment. He is a successful independent hotel owner and operator in his own right, and he also now acts as a freelance consultant. He's got over 30 years of experience in the industry, and Tim, if you don't mind me saying, in your own words, prides himself on leading change. So I'm sure he'll have some insightful views for us now. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on the webinar today. There's clearly never been a more important time to focus on turnaround and recovery, and I'm delighted to be able to share my thoughts on the challenges and opportunities within the hotel sector. So firstly, who am I? Well, I've got over 30 years experience in the industry, requiring around 22 house moves. I've hosted 3 party political conferences, and as of last night, have been involved in 2 TV shows. I was managing director at and shareholder at the Castle Green Hotel in Kendal until we sold the hotel in 2018 in what fellow panelist Julian True called the largest and most valuable individual hotel sale that's ever taken place in Cumbria. Since then, I've started my own consultancy business, and I remain as MD and shareholder in the Best Western Plus Pinewood Hotel near Manchester Airport. I've also been on the board of Best Western GB since 2009 and chairman since 2017. So today, hopefully I can speak from the perspective of an international brand, a business consultant, and a hotel owner. There's no doubt that in the COVID-19 pandemic, it's going to force the most significant change that the hotel industry has ever seen. And today, in the limited time that's available, I want to talk to you about what that means for the hotel operation and for coming out the other end. The most important element that guests are going to be looking for in the short term are going to be safety, hygiene, and cleanliness. In a matter of weeks at Best Western, we've produced the most comprehensive and detailed set of standards we've ever asked our members to adopt. And this has been done with very limited direction from government. We've relied on the most part from on the industry guidance through UK Hospitality and also on our own brand standards. Our members are all independent hoteliers who usually, believe me, don't like being told what to do. But on our webinar last week, this was the topic, and it was the best attended and best received communication that we've ever done to our hotels. So hoteliers have definitely realised that things are changing. Within 5 touch points of the guest experience, we've produced requirements and recommendations of operation. And what is clear is that hotels are going to need to focus on 3 key areas in the new operating norm. Mobile technology will enable guests to check in and to check out remotely. That's something that we'll be introducing. We'll have a new WhatsApp messenger service, which will be introduced so that guests can stay in touch and order items using their own phone during the stay. Every hotel is going to need to install and will be installing sanitizer stations at entrances, lobbies, meeting rooms and social areas. Plexiglass screens will shield guests and staff at reception. Every guest room will be isolated and deep cleaned to clinically approved anti-COVID-19 standards after use. And every hotel will increase the frequency of cleaning procedures, adopting new anti-COVID-19 products and approaches. We'll introduce grab and go breakfasts to the guest room or from reception. Social distancing signage throughout the hotel will remind everyone to keep a safe distance, and will provide sanitized key cards for guest rooms and meeting rooms and reconfigure workspaces to allow people to meet safely. What we've tried to do throughout this process is to minimize the cost to our hotels, but it's inevitable that costs are going to increase, particularly cleaning costs. Although because of technology, productivity may improve. One of the key challenges, however, throughout all this is how we're going to provide genuine customer service and enjoyment when guests, for instance, are interacting with a receptionist through a screen or having to sit 2 meters apart in a cavernous function room. And I'm afraid, Nick, it's going to be the end for the eponymous breakfast buffet, for the time being at least. So this leads us on to the business model, which was already under huge pressure because of rising costs and flattening demand, even before this crisis. We now have the perfect storm of increased operating costs, reduced demand, and less capacity. These are the business norms of a 100-bedroom hotel, an efficiently run 100-bedroom hotel pre-COVID, to the gross profit level and obviously before overheads. As a consultant, I spend the majority of my time talking to owners and their teams about the commerciality of their businesses, or lack of it in many instances. More often than not, wage cost is not broken down by department, and certainly not discussed with departmental managers. Budgets, if they exist, are written by the owner with no input from the team. And cost controls like food flash reports do not exist. And by the time the P&L comes out, it's often too late. So I believe that the era of the unsophisticated hotel operator that Julian was referring to is now gone once and for all. Even if they can cope with the new protocols, they will not be able to operate profitably unless they change their approach to the business. At my hotel, which is an 89-bedroomed hotel, we forecast that we're going to open at around 40% occupancy. We hope to achieve an annualized occupancy in the first year post-COVID or post-lockdown of around 50%. And the best case scenario for us, I think, will be a break even in the full year, and that's with all our CapEx cancelled. This is also with more debt in the business because we've accessed the Seabills loan, and those capital and interest repayments are going to kick in that in year 2 of reopening. So businesses are no longer going to be able to run inefficiently or by the seat of their pants any longer. But I'm a glass half full sort of character, and I do believe we have to remain positive. And I finally want to share the initiatives that have been taking place in Best Western during COVID-19 and what I will be putting in place at my hotel when we reopen. At Best Western, I think we've positioned ourselves as the most prominent brand in the marketplace throughout the crisis. We were the first hotel group to offer our hotels to recovering COVID-19 patients, key workers and vulnerable groups. We've lobbied the government and pushed media campaigns relating to the CBILS scheme and the insurance industry in relation to business interruption claims. We've created innovative marketing campaigns like A Wave with Words, where we've connected our isolated customer base and our furloughed staff through a massive letter writing campaign. Last night saw the first episode of a very British hotel chain, a Channel 4 programme following the characters and the hotels within the brand. And that's going to be aired over the next 3 weeks. And I've just been looking at the web stats from last night, and they're very, very positive for us. And this week, we'll use those characters that have appeared in the show to film a video which will anchor back to what I was just talking about earlier, our safety, hygiene and cleanliness regime, to give confidence in our hotel product prior to the hoped for reopening in early July. Along with that, we're going to be uploading videos from staff and customers showing scenes from lockdown called Britain Doesn't Do Boring and Nor Do We. And we'll then link into our summer marketing campaign called The Great British Escape to the music of the Steve McQueen epic and classic film to try and tap into the domestic staycation market. And from a hotel owner's point of view, I've got to ensure that my business remains viable. So I'm going to be looking at the management structure to see where I can make efficiencies. Do I still need a sales manager, a reception manager, and a general manager? The team are going to need to become truly multi-skilled. Training, culture, and contracts are going to reflect the fact that staff will have to work across all departments. At the Pinewood, we've got a very large and attractive garden, and just like today, the sun often shines in Manchester, so we're going to introduce al fresco dining, and the garden will become our restaurant when we can. And I don't know if anybody's tried to get a takeaway recently. Most of them are closed, and the ones that are left, you have to put an advanced order in, and they're doing very good business. So I'm going to create the best takeaway in the area with my AA Rosette chef, tapping into hotel guests and to local residents. So although the customer experience will be different, we're going to deliver it with fun, and we're going to simplify the operation. And I think that's the way that hotels are going to need to look at things. So in closing, there will be normal again, but it's going to be a new normal. And I think only those businesses that adapt will survive. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Fascinating stuff. Really insightful, and really glad again to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Before we hand you over to Ross, our final speaker, I've got a third and final polling question for you all, please. We'd like your views on, in the new norm, which of these leisure business types do you feel will be more resilient or more adaptable? Do you think it will be the bars and restaurants, cafes and fast food, entertainment, so your golfing, bowling, darts and axe throwing and various other things, or health and fitness? Get your responses into that now. As I said earlier, we'll come back to the responses to these in a few moments and have a bit more of a discussion. And I'm now going to hand you over for our final speaker to Ross Curtin, who heads our leisure agency team within Colliers in the UK. He's got over 15 should I say, sorry, years experience within the leisure and entertainment sectors. Ross, I have had a bit of an idea for an outside entertainment venue. Could we maybe introduce welly wagging to the corporate world? I don't know. I'd be fascinated in your view on that. Ross is now going to give us his view on the hospitality and leisure sector. Over to you, please, Ross.
Thanks, Nick. So good morning, everyone. So what is leisure? In our world, that includes everything from bars and restaurants, gyms, cinemas, bingos. The buzzword that everyone was talking about pre-lockdown was competitive socializing. So your indoor crazy golfs, your quirky flight clubs, the indoor darts, and indoor and other similar attractions such as axe throwing. As a sector, revenue across all of it is about 117 billion. That translates to 7.4% of GDP, and about 1 in 8 jobs are in the hospitality sector. So that was then, this is now. The sector closed pretty much overnight, and the buzzword changed that everyone was talking about from competitive socializing to social distancing. With many venues now without any form of income, they've looked to innovative secondary spends. We've seen bars and restaurants look to offer takeout facilities. Some have been more successful than others. We've had studio gyms offering at-home classes, pay-on-demand facilities. And some of the restaurants have been doing at-home meal kits available. So people like Coat in London, Pizza Pilgrims offering the frying pan pizza. And I think some of these initiatives will continue going forward and will possibly help bridge the gap in terms of the shortfall of income as a result of social distancing. So what have we seen? So we've seen there's been a massive drain on cash. Some listed groups have sought, sorry, can we go back? Some listed groups have sought to issue share placing. Others have sought to look to the coronavirus business interruption loans. However, a number of occupiers in the leisure sector are not eligible for these loans, and as a result, we're likely to see wide-scale restructuring across the sector. Pubs has generally gone through a lot of pain in recent years, and I think out of all the subsectors should come out of this the fairest. Restaurants were really midway through a turnaround cycle. The class of 2018, as it's referred, saw a number of branded groups do CVA processes and saw over 300 branded restaurants return to landlords to be re-let. The gym market, particularly in London, got particularly toasty from a rental perspective, and we might see some rebalancing of that. Next slide. So what might life in the future look like? So I think CBDs are certainly going to come under pressure, and in particular in London, where you're going to see more people continuing to work from home. And as a result, we might see more demand and more sales pushed through neighbourhood businesses, which could be an interesting position in terms of how businesses evolve. Many businesses are going to need to relook at their business model. I think there's two kind of business plans going around at the moment. There's those who are looking to the near future and what else they can do in terms of their model or their offer, and those who are on version 8 of their old plan and trying to make it fix. In terms of the sector, I'm generally, again, I'm more optimistic. You can't go on holiday overseas this year, likely. You can't go watch live sporting matches. People are going to want to let off steam somehow. You just need to go to your local park to see people are desperate to meet up with their friends. And I think when the sector returns, albeit with social distancing, people will be very keen to go back and socialise with friends. So for some sectors, it's going to be significantly harder. In particular, nightclubs and bingos come to mind as two sectors where I think there's going to be a lot more challenges faced. And then when these businesses reopen, the model needs to be looked at, because one of the lessons we've learned from our colleagues in Asia is that when F&B facilities in China reopened, there was a supply line issue because they weren't able to get all of the products in there to be able to for full-scale menu options. Not only that, one of the things they commented was not only was the issue around social distancing, It was actually around, they simply didn't have enough stock to serve people. So that's something to be mindful of in terms of when we reopen. I think we're going to see much more spending in terms of technology. The pay over app facilities look like they're definitely going to gain momentum. People might start to look at opening hours. In London, we've seen brunch has been hugely successful. Can this be rolled out across the UK? Will that favourite restaurant that you've always struggled to get into start to broaden its opening hours so you can get into? But there definitely is going to be some pain. And I think restaurants and some of the more newer businesses are likely to suffer that. So we also need to look at how you could repurpose space. Days like today certainly give you the strong merits towards outside eating and drinking. And if anyone's seen in the news, Lithuania, of all countries, have proposed that they're going to hand over national parks to restaurant operators. It would be great to see something like that come here. Obviously, our climate isn't always providing for days like today, and you might need to look forward to some cover facilities. On the slides here, I've got Copper Club, which is on the South Bank, but have regional venues as well. One thing I would flag is, though, do make sure people are obtaining the necessary consents for using this. You could also find gym facilities. The HIIT studio, which can only hold 40 at the best of times, would be at, say, 20 on a social distancing. Could that be repurposed to offer that class within rackets space, which is underutilised, and you might be able to get back your 40 numbers? So lots of interesting ideas there around how you can try and drive turnover and in terms of to restoring it. So I think generally speaking, we're on for a bumpy road ahead. Many staff have been furloughed across the sector, and hospitality is rich with migrant workers. When the sector reopens, is there an issue in terms of, are these workers even still in the UK? Can they get back to the UK? And of course, the biggest cost in everyone's mind is property costs, which turnover down. This is one fixed cost that you have very little control of. The government very helpfully offered rates relief, which was in some ways the easy one to do because there was only one beneficiary. But property is very fragmented with various ownerships. And the issues of the 1954 Act lease can provide some issues. We have various pressure groups participating for different forms of restructuring, from you've got the national timeout to a three-way split. I think one thing which definitely is top of my mind is there needs to be both communication between landlords and tenants and compromise on both sides. Another thing I would flag in terms of property, you might be able to shore up the main business, but there's many leases, and I know I've done it myself, where we've signed on behalf of occupiers and there's ARGAs in place. If those subtenants or assignees go bust, you could end up carrying the baby in terms of you re-inheriting these property costs going forward. So in terms of an outlook, as I alluded, I'm quite optimistic. I think it's definitely going to be more U-shaped than V-shaped. Consolidation looks definitely likely to occur across the sector. Quite simply, there's just too many small groups out there and who would benefit from the economies of scale by having a single head office function. Demand is fair. I think it's been in the press, Carluccio's, there's been a number of bidders for it. And I don't say that as being an exception. I think other sectors and brands will continue to get good levels of interest. So that's my summary. I'll now pass you back to Nick.
Ross, thank you for that. And thanks to everybody for listening. That brings us to the end of our formal presentations for today. It's 11:20, so we've got 10 minutes or so, or maybe a bit more if those of you on with us have got a bit more time for some Q&A and for some discussion. We've had plenty of questions come in, both in the registration information and also during this webinar. I think I'll probably start by bringing up the responses, if we can, to the first of our polling questions, which was in relation to time before we think the hotel hospitality sector might recover. So I hope that everybody with us today this morning can see the answers to that. We've got roughly 50% of respondents, nearly 300 in total, I think 12 to 18 months. And interestingly, we've had a number of questions submitted as well about how long do we think that it will take this sector to get back to capacity. And that probably ties in with a number of questions that relate to, Ben, you touched on this, and to your presentation, Julian, as well, from a saleability perspective. What do we think are going to be the immediate and more medium-term impacts on profitability and value? So if we were to look, let's say, within the next, let's say 3 to 6 months compared to the next 6 to 12, what would be your views from a valuation perspective in terms of what impact is that going to have on the underlying value of these sorts of assets?
Let me, thanks very much, Nick. Thanks for the question. Let me just start that off, and Julian, you can follow through. As a result of everything that we've discussed, NOIs, EBITDAs are going to be severely impacted. Let's hope most businesses can get back to at least a positive NOI. For some, that's going to be a struggle. Some won't make it. But assuming they do, they're not going to be anywhere near the levels that they were back in 19. And as we've said, that may take years to come back. As a result of that, establishing a value of a hotel is going to be extremely difficult. Subject to the type of hotel, its location, etc., I believe that there's definitely a correction in value of probably 10 to 15%, but up to 25 or 30% at the other far end of the scale in hotel values that we could see through the next 2 to 3 years, simply because of this recalibration of the dynamic of profit flow through from a hotel and its revenue sources. Julian, thoughts?
Yeah. Speaking from an agent's perspective, clearly valuation is a really important part of our business. Hopefully valuers will take a longer term view on things and look at DCF over 10 years or consider fair maintainable trade. The thing that concerns me is that there's a tendency in times like this to start to rely on comparable evidence. And if there's a reliance on that, generally when there is a downturn in the marketplace, it's often the weaker unit that comes to the market. And therefore we're not comparing apples with pears. I think in terms of I think it's too early to start giving percentages in drop of valuation, but it is probably going to happen. But a lot depends, as you pointed out, Ben, on what it is, where it is, the quality of the business. I still think even during troubled times, something that's a high quality unit that has a past track record of being able to trade well will continue to generate good interest. We're selling a place in the Cotswolds at the moment, a place called Dumbleton Hall. And right the way through COVID, we've run a process and we had 10 indicative bids. We ran best and final offers that came in last Friday. We're very comfortable with the response that we've had. I'm not suggesting that will take place in everything moving forwards, but that is a vanilla unit. It's a good unit and there will be demand for good units moving forwards.
Thanks, guys. So there's several questions that relate to the valuation point, and Julian, you just touched on it with what you said there. We've had some questions about percentage discounts. I think we probably all agree it would be perhaps arbitrary to just be applying percentage discounts. You need to be looking quite forensically at an individual business and its trading model, but perhaps more to the point, what its business plan is for its re-entry into the market. And I guess from my perspective, the old way of the old method of looking at your previous 3 years trading accounts is, still has some merit, but going forward, you're probably going to be looking at a slightly different perspective. We've also had some related questions about taking on additional debt, including C-bills. Do you guys think that will have any sort of additional impact on either profitability or indeed saleability?
Do you want me to come in there, Nick?
Yeah, Tim, be fascinated for your view on that.
Yeah, I think we're all going through, including the government, an evolving process at the moment. The furlough scheme's been very welcome, and what that has allowed us to do, obviously, is offset a significant amount of our payroll costs. From a liquidity point of view, what hotels have done, and we've done it, and I alluded to in my presentation, is taken on some additional debt through C-bills. But I think we're still very much at the beginning of this in terms of how this is going to play out from a financial point of view for businesses. And my personal view is that this is going to evolve further to a point where governments are going to need to start looking at industry support, and they're going to have to start looking at grants, because I don't think that the hotel model for many businesses is going to be sustainable with this extra debt in the business and the sort of profitability levels that are then going to exist going forward. So one of the big things we've been doing through Best Western, as I said, is lobbying very hard. UK Hospitality have been doing a great job. And I think there's going to have to be government support for hospitality moving forward. And yes, as things stand, you know, our gearing is comfortable, but we've put more debt in the business now, and it will all depend how quickly business comes back and whether we can support those loan repayments through cash flow and through the profitability of the business. And for me, the jury's very much out on that at the moment.
Thanks, Tim. I think, can we get the responses to the second polling question displayed? Is that possible? Here we go. So in order of recovery, which sectors do you feel recover the quickest? So some a fairly noticeable majority there. Holiday parks, that's an interesting one. We don't, of course, on this call have any of our resorts team with us today, but it is part of the alternative markets division. But I'd be interested if any of the panelists have any particular views on holiday parks. I think we've mentioned staycations, and Tim, that maybe ties into some of the things that you were talking about just now. And maybe when thinking about that as well, we've had some other questions, and if I think about the responses to the first polling question of 12 to 18 months over for recovery, I guess the other question is, how many hotels do you think can survive if it's going to take that long to get back to full capacity? And do you think there's any particular groups or types of hotels that will find it more or less difficult to survive that period?
Yeah, I think we've all been through difficult times before, and as many panelists said, hoteliers are resilient and adaptable business people. I think what's different about this is that in a downturn like the financial crash in 2008. There are hotels that and businesses across many sectors that have limped on and frankly not been economically viable. And and what a significant downturn can do is it cuts those businesses out, and it sort of restarts the system. I think what's different here is that my view from the beginning is that we weren't going to, there's no way we were going to have a V recovery in regard to this issue. You know, then we started talking about a U recovery, which is now a bit more fashionable. But I listened to Danny Blanchflower on Channel 4 News last night. He was talking about an L. So how long is this going to go on is the question. And I think that it's very difficult to put a number on how many businesses are going to go down, but businesses will go down. I think the conceived wisdom about which businesses will find it more difficult at the moment is I think the top end luxury market is going to struggle because they're very much about experience and service, spa facilities, leisure, and that involves customer contact, and that top end service involves a lot of staff coming into contact with a lot of customers. My personal view is that the economy sector will probably do better because they can afford to rely on technology, and their cost base will be lower. I think a lot of it will depend on customer behaviour. I think there is a mood now of support and altruism and being able to perhaps look at how you can give more support to your local businesses and stay in the UK and look at stay local to a large degree. But what is going to be a big unknown in this, and it has been a surprise to a lot of people, is how nervous the customer base will be about going out and interacting again. So I think the budget and the economy market will probably come through this better. Julian talked about leisure and rural and coastal versus city, but I think the luxury market is going to suffer, and a lot of it will be down to how the customers respond and react, and how bullish they are in coming out and getting into a hotel environment again.
Nick, can I just mention? I found it fascinating, the results of the poll, that there are quite a few people that thought that nightclubs were going to return sooner than things like hotels. So I'm guessing there's a lot of young people out there, or quite a few old swingers that want, and it's a reliance more on hope than reality. But just in terms of what Tim was saying, agree 100%, but in a nutshell, it'll be a survival of the fittest. If you're good at what you do, irrespective of what part of the hotel industry you're in, you're in a good position if you can beat off your competition. But if you don't know what you're doing, and this happened in 2008, it sorts out the wheat from the chaff. And if it is that you haven't got marketing plans, you've not got good staff, you've not got all the good basics in place, you'll find it very difficult. No question at all about that. So it's just a race to be as fit as possible. And if you are in any industry, you've got the best chance of getting through it.
And
Thanks.
final,
Nick, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, final thoughts around that. To Julian's point, don't forget, there's many different ways to structure the management of a hotel in this business. So although some hotels have not perhaps been as successful, or may not be as successful as they were under one type of management structure, by changing that in the future, or contemplating changes, they may be more successful in the future. So I'm talking about whether it's privately owned and privately managed, whether it's given to a brand to manage under a management agreement, whether an owner takes a franchise agreement, whether it's run on some sort of hybrid model through what we call a white label operator. So it may be that as we examine businesses going forward, a different structure supporting that individual business may make it more likely to succeed into the future than otherwise.
Thanks, Ben, and also Tim and Julian for your comments on that. I think that's a pretty rounded view. I'm conscious of time, but we've still got almost 300 people on this webinar by the looks of things. We've got plenty of questions around, and maybe we'll try and bring in the leisure sectors into this as well. And perhaps it would be a tenuous link for me to ask if we can have the responses to the final polling question on screen first of all, if that's possible. This is interesting. So in the new norm, which of these business types do you feel will be more resilient or adaptable? So clearly the majority in cafes and fast food. Tim, you talked about takeaways. I've had several in the last few weeks, or collections. But beyond that, fairly even split between bars, restaurants, entertainment, and health and fitness venues. I know we didn't include hotels in that specifically, but that's an interesting flavour in terms of how people think these segments are going to respond. And I suppose what I want to do to lead on from that is ask, and Ross, be interested in your view on this as well, from the broader hospitality and leisure sector. If we do, or should I say when we start to see the manifestation of more stress and distress and buyers and sellers of different types and shapes and sizes coming forward, what's the panel's view in terms of how supportive our lenders and stakeholders going to be? Will they be looking to sort of work through the challenges, or maybe exit these connections a bit more swiftly, as we've seen in previous cycles? What's your view when we do get to a point of sale in terms of, is there going to be acquisition finance available to buy these sorts of assets, or is that going to be difficult to come by? And lastly on that, do we think as well of anything about alternative uses? So sputtering of a few questions there, be interested in the panel's thoughts on those.
Nick, can I come in? It's Peter. just think in terms of bank support, I think generally what I'm seeing is banks are supportive at the moment. I think there is an opportunity to repair some of the reputational damage of the 08 crash. It still lingers on, and I think generally keeping businesses going is probably the best option lenders have, as long as there's some degree of serviceability, at least of interest, because as the panelists have alluded to, trying to sell in the current climate is possible, but you're probably going to get low value. So I think most lenders, and certainly from my own experience of turnarounds and workouts, you need to try and see things through to better times in whatever shape or form that is. So you may see more the return of large-scale debt equity, so that businesses can survive but on lower debt levels, but with the banks taking equity stakes instead, and a variety of different options. There's also a lot of alternative lenders coming into the market who see opportunities. So I think financing will be there, but I think people's perceptions of values are going to be a lot different to what they were 6 months ago.
Yeah, Nick, just we've been involved in several bank team meetings over the last few weeks, and certainly the perspective that I've seen is that they're going to be pretty supportive of the customers. There's talk of covenant waivers in certain circumstances, bank loan moratorium, and if more money is needed to help them get through the troubled times, I think it's going to be there. Yeah, I'm quite convinced that the banks will do all they can for the time being, but then a lot will depend on cash flow and viability as we start to move forward. But certainly in the interim period, whilst we're in this kind of period of uncertainty, I'm sure the banks are going to do what they can to support their customers to get through things.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Ben, Ross, do you have any?
Yeah, I think we're seeing exactly the same in leisure, that the banks are being much more willing than they have been in previous years to stay involved. I mean, pubs in particular, I think there's certainly appetite in terms of new lending. I know that from calls I've had, that there's new, and will be, as we'll talk, the new lenders coming into it. And one thing which certainly seems to be apparent is that understanding of, you know, the Armageddon scenario of alternative uses if the operational business doesn't survive does seem to be much more important to these lenders going forward.
Okay, thanks for that. And maybe
Ben here. Yeah,
sorry, Ben.
Just tailing in on that couple of thoughts. We see appetite from new investors into the sector, no doubt about it. They'll be looking for particular types of assets. I think that'll accelerate through 2021 rather than in the next 2 or 3 months. I think one thing that can certainly help get the sector back online, and to something that Tim mentioned, is specific governmental support for the hospitality industry. As we see around Europe, some of these countries where hospitality is a huge GDP provider, France, Italy, Spain, you know, for instance, France government have announced a substantial €1 billion fund to help that industry through the tourist season of this year get back on its feet. So I think, you know, the more we can support the industry on local level, governmental level, then the more I think lenders will continue to have faith and be supportive, and actually the more it will attract future activity from buy side into the future.
Okay, thanks everyone. As I say, I am conscious of time, but we do still have over 200 guests with us. So if everybody will humour me, we'll maybe just keep going for another couple of minutes or so. We had some questions that were submitted to us as part of the registration, so I feel it's only fair to give some of those an airing. And Tim, perhaps there's one that you can touch on here. This is from Chris at Amity Hospitality Limited. Chris, thanks for joining us. I hope you're still with us. The question is, how do you see the relationship between the hotel sector and online travel agencies post-coronavirus?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of discussion about this taking place in various forums. I mean, I over the years, I've not been a fan of the OTAs. When they first entered the market, I think there was a real issue for a lot of hotels in the cost that put into the business. Clearly, what they are now is a very important part of the demand side of the hotel sector. And the discussion has been around whether this is an opportunity to reset the dial. Can we move forward now as an industry without having this cost in our business? And much like the airlines did, find our own way to distribute and to market within the sector without that sort of 15 to 25% cost, which was showing in the slide that I put up as a cost of sale for rooms. It's about 12 to maybe 15% of accommodation sales is commissions now. Personally, I think it's going to be very challenging. I think they're embedded now in the system. And I think to move forward without the OTAs will be very, very difficult. And we can look at initiatives like Room Key, where hotel brands come together and try and keep the business within the industry. But it only takes one of the brands to break ranks and the whole thing falls apart. So I think we'll have to continue to work with the OTAs. What I would say, though, is that as an industry, what we've got to do is play to this mood that exists in our customer base now of supporting industry where the customers have seen that it's very much under pressure, and try and persuade customers to book direct and to take that cost out. So book direct either through the brand partnership that you've got or direct into the hotel, and try and change buyer behavior. And again, I think this comes back to lobbying, and it comes back to industry leaders trying to influence the customer base, because a lot of our bookers don't understand that if they book through one of the OTAs, it's 20% that we're going to be paying in commission there or thereabouts. So I think they're here to stay. I think there's an opportunity for us to engage with them and potentially try and drive down those commission rates. But for me, it's about educating our customers and communicating with our customers. The best way to keep cash in our business and to support us financially is to pick up the phone and book direct with the hotel.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I don't know if anyone else has any additional views on that. Otherwise, I'll probably just move to one final question and then some closing remarks, if I may. We have had plenty, as I say, of questions in. James Gillibrand at Duff & Phelps, thanks again for joining us. Ross, you mentioned this in your talk, so maybe just some brief thoughts from you, please, in terms of supply chains. How do you think that is going to manifest when these businesses do start to reopen? And as an extension of that, we had some questions in the live Q&A and also from Robert Soto at Ambius in the registrations about seating areas and replacing them with plants and other sorts of uses. So what's your view on that, please?
In terms of suppliers, I think it's going to be bumpy. I think a lot of operators have chosen not to pay suppliers, and as a result, some of their suppliers are going to be feeling the pain. As we saw with China, there was a real strain in terms of just being able to produce sufficient food to get to the restaurant outlets. So when we do reopen, don't be expecting full menus on everything. I think it's going to be a very slow road back in towards that. In terms of the seating, there's two schools of thoughts going on. There's some people who are going into a restaurant, taking out half the seats to be able to provide the 2-meter social distancing. Think it looks very weird and very empty, and how do you create that ambience? And then there's other people like Oakman Inns, who are multiple based in Hertfordshire, who have come up with more creative ways in terms of how they can rearrange the seats to create this perspex paneling in between the seats without it really having a feeling like you sat in the middle of a UPVC factory.
Okay, thanks for that, Ross. Anyone else have any final thoughts on that before we come to a close?
Yeah, Nick, it's Ben here. Just a couple of thoughts. Let's remember, if you're a privately owned hotel and you run it with your family, internally, you have the choice to hopefully choose local suppliers. So you're choosing people who run their own businesses, the sourcing, the quality of the products, etc. And that clearly is important. I think slightly more of a challenge, and what we've seen, is in branded hotels where you're being mandated to use a particular supply chain that may be on a national or even international basis. That's where we've had very difficult discussions with the suppliers in recent weeks about actually pausing the costs associated with, or holidaying the costs associated with, the contract that's in place at that hotel level. So I think sourcing on a local level, shorter term contracts, doing business that with people whom actually is all the way forward in terms of generally sort of contracting and reviewing terms and conditions for the future. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Anyone else, any final remarks on that before we bring this to a close, please? I'll take that as a no. Look, guys, I just want to say thanks again, first of all, to our speakers, our panelists today. We've still got 170 odd people booked on this webinar now as well. So thank you very much to everybody for your time this morning. We're really glad that you could join us. I think we've had some interesting perspectives given. There are many more questions that, unfortunately, our apologies, we've not been able to get to today, but we'll be delighted to pick up those discussions offline at a convenient time. We've had a number of questions about the slides and the recording, and I think I'm right in saying that the recording will be made available afterwards. And feel free to drop me a line or any one of the panelists if you've got any more specific queries that you'd like to chat through. Now, just to bring things finally to a close, I'll hand over to Peter for his closing address.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, just echo your thoughts to the rest of the panel. It's been really interesting and delighted to see so many people logged in. I think we were up to over 350 at one point. I guess the others who have registered will be forwarding the webinar out to them via our website and via Colliers in due course. So if they've missed it now, they'll still be able to catch up with it. Very quickly, I'm conscious of time. There's an upcoming TMA event, which is a panel of the TMA board and others talking about the shape of things to come and their thoughts on what's happened so far. So watch out for details of that. And then the next one in this webinar series will be on the 17th of June. And again, we'll be posting out details of that shortly. So hope you can join us for that. So that's it from me. Thank you all for attending, and glad that and hope you find it all very useful. And just there was the final slide. We are still trying and hoping to do our conference in November. We'll have to see how that goes. Obviously, as is clear today, there's a lot of uncertainty about quite how we can do that. But these webinars are proving very effective ways of reaching a far wider audience than normal. So we're making the most of that. So watch this space for that. So thank you all once again, and enjoy the rest of this sunny day.